Hi, this is Teddy, and you're listening to Jen Senko, writer and director of The Brainwashing of My Dad, on Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm glad my dad hasn't been brainwashed by right-wing media.
Hey folks, welcome back to Two Broads Talking Politics. As usual, I am one of your hosts, Sophie, and I'm here with your other host, Kelly. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, everyone.
And joining us today to talk a little bit about the right-wing media is Jen Senko, the director of The Brainwashing of My Dad, a 2016 documentary that looks at the rise and the methods of the right-wing media through the lens of stories about people who have been affected by it. Welcome, Jen.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, as I mentioned, the film looks at the right-wing media sort of through the framing of stories by people whose loved ones have sort of become different people through consuming that media. And the main story that we follow in the film is the story of your dad. Can you tell us a little bit about your dad, what happened with him, and sort of how that inspired you to make this movie?
Right. So my dad, growing up, was this really fun, very open-minded dad. And I'd say both my parents were non-political Kennedy Democrats, but both my parents were very open-minded. My dad especially, he was almost embarrassingly open-minded, wearing, he was almost like a hippie before hippies. He kind of had this free spirit attitude about life. And so one day my parents moved and he had a lengthened commute to work, and it was a solo commute. And, previously he had driven to work in carpools and that kind of thing. But 97% of talk radio is right wing. And at that time, it was Bob Grant, and who was the big talk radio guy. So, not looking for music, he found talk radio. He found Bob Grant. And Bob Grant, I don't know if you guys know or your audience knows, but he's often called the father of conservative radio. I mean, he wasn't the first one. There was Father Coughlin back in the 60s, and there were other people, but Bob Grant was like the first really big one on the map. And he kind of designed, came up with this shock jock kind of format. And he was openly racist, openly sexist. And basically, if you disagreed with him, he'd yell, "Get off my phone." So my dad, we just started noticing these changes very slowly. He became more irritable and more judgmental, and would occasionally say something that just didn't sound like him. And I think we didn't really think about it that much at the time. But then one day he retired, and Bob Grant was like the gateway drug, and he started listening to Rush Limbaugh. And he began listening to him for 3 hours a day at home during his lunch. And that's when he really, really started to change. And ultimately, he just became this guy that we didn't even recognize. I'd say the main characteristic that was really different was that he was angry. He was angry all the time, and you couldn't disagree with him because, by golly, he knew better. And I guess Rush Limbaugh told him, like when email came in and, people were getting online, he told him, like, "Oh, you should look up these sites." So eventually my dad joined just about every right-wing group you could think of, from I Hate Immigrants to the NRA, and this was a guy that didn't even hunt, to, some group like Christians are being attacked whatever. And then he started sending us these horrid emails all the time, and emails, especially by then Clinton was in, against Clinton, like Clinton's going to put any dissidents in jail. He's going to take your guns. The same stuff they say about Democrats over and over again. And this was very disturbing to my whole family, not just because he changed and he seemed to change his views, but because he was filled with such anger and so arrogant about it. And he, would basically kind of like almost like adopt the personality of these guys. Like he'd just yell at you if you didn't agree with him. And it was very disturbing. And, first my brothers said, everybody said, I'm going to block you. And I think I eventually blocked him. Well, actually, I did something really kind of sneaky. I've never said this before, but I just remembered that I did this. I created another persona via email. You know how you can have a couple different emails. So I created this character called Eric Ebola, and the email was called Ebola. And in it, I pretended to be a right-winger, but who always saw the other side of the story. And I did it in a very even-handed way, not like myself where I would get very upset. And he would respond to those emails. I've just never said that before. I just remember that happened. But so that's basically it. And yeah, he just changed terribly. So that's what happened to my dad. But then I also started noticing at the same time, some friends of mine that maybe had moved away or went to the South, they started saying similar things that my dad was saying almost around the same time. It was very strange, so I just, I became just really heightened. I had a heightened awareness of like this new onslaught of what seemed like a right-wing attack, or right-wing media, and it was very disturbing to me. And then that's when I thought, I want to make a film about this. This needs really more attention, and I need to look into this.
So Sophie mentioned in the intro that, this is done through the framing of stories, but you also take a look at sort of the history of how this started, and it goes back even before these right-wing radio hosts. When you started thinking about doing this film, had you intended to sort of go back and look at the whole history? How did you decide to sort of go back that far, which I found totally fascinating?
Well, I started researching it more, and actually I had this small media watchdog group that me and a few neighbors started, and it eventually turned into a documentary club where we watched a lot of documentaries and drank a lot of wine, and this went on for 3 years. So I was constantly learning about things, and I had run across the film The Hunting of the President that David Brock was in, who actually came out and said, he was a right winger, and he was part of this plot to get rid of Bill Clinton. So I already had some of that stuff, some information under my belt, and I started seeing a bigger picture. But when I made the film, I had people reach out to me, and certain people reach out to me, like Claire Connor was one of them, and she wrote Wrapped in the Flag, and she talked about her growing up in a Birch Society family, and I read her book, and that kind of made me realize that it went back, to the 50s and the 60s. So all of the people that I interviewed helped me see all of these different events that happened along the way that helped push the country to the right, but it was delivered it was like mainlined, via the buildup of right-wing media.
So in the course of the movie, there are a couple of stories told about people whose loved ones are women who experience this change. And there's one person who talks about having been really into right-wing media as a very young person. He's 24, although he's since pulled away from it. But most of the stories I noticed were stories of people like your dad, older white men. Why do you think that right-wing media is so appealing to older people and to older white men in specific?
Well, it purposely appeals to them. I mean, it was originally designed for them. They were vulnerable in that they were being sort of displaced in a sense by society. I mean, in the 60s and the 50s, 60s, 70s, like there was all this social unrest and change happening. And, there were women's rights, there were civil rights, there was anti-war protests, in the very, very beginnings of like gay rights. And basically, I mean, if you think about it, it was kind of putting the white man back a little, which would end up being like more on an even playing field. And so I think it's almost like there were a lot of them were suffering an identity crisis, like, who am I? What's my function? To some degree, I'm losing my power. Who the hell are these other people that want to come and take my power? I'm not saying they were all necessarily angry to begin with, but they were being asked to change. They were asked to, share housework with women. Women wanted rights. What is their role? All of that was so confusing. And so they were ripe for this kind of exploitation, So I mean that was the original audience. That's who these people were aiming at, the angry white man. So that's who a lot of it is, and then it kind of grew from there. It's surprising some of the people that aren't old white men that got hooked on this stuff too.
Were there things as you were researching this, as you were getting deeper into this, were there things that surprised you, things that you hadn't expected going in or you didn't realize would be the case?
Definitely. I knew that it was happening on some level to other people, but I had no idea just how many people it affected. It was like opening a floodgate. Like when I did a Kickstarter campaign, I couldn't believe how many people were just reaching out to me, telling me their sad stories. I lost my mom, I lost my dad, I lost my brother, and they won't speak to me anymore. And what your dad went through is like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Like all these people wondered what happened to their loved one. They weren't the same. They were unreachable. They were angry. They were tortured. And I'd say that surprised me. Maybe that surprised me the most. And, even since then, like since 2016, I still get emails or whatever, people talking to me every day about, it's like I'm like the Ann Landers of this happened to my, fill in the blank. So that surprised me the most. And then I guess another thing that surprised me was the effect of the Telecommunications Act that Bill Clinton signed. I didn't realize how much impact that had. I think at the time I just was happy that a Democrat was in office because I didn't like Reagan very much. But, Bill Clinton signed this bipartisan bill, the Telecommunications Act, which allowed for consolidation of big media. So I was surprised that that act, something like that, could really help create the like restriction of media that we have, which has resulted in like the corporate media of today. It's just funny. It's like, people call it the liberal media, but it's just so it couldn't be more wrong because you may have a liberal journalist, let's say, but he's got to answer to his corporate boss. So yeah, so that surprised me, and what that resulted in. I guess I had a couple different surprises. Even going back to 1964 with Goldwater, and then some of the things that David Brock told me, like I can't remember his name right now, but the guy who started AIM, Accuracy in Media, to start labeling like the media liberal and prejudicing people against it. So yeah, those couple things surprised me as well.
So in the film, I don't want to spoil the ending for anybody, but your father does become a little bit less indoctrinated towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
You and your mother are able to sort of bring him back towards the middle, to move away from right-wing media. And so what is your advice for how we approach people who feed on right-wing media? Like, how do we undo the damage? Because my problem that I always struggle with is that we've identified that all of these white men are feeling alienated by change, but we're not going to stop asking them to change. So what can we do to sort of counteract this indoctrination? What is your recommendation, sort of based on your experience?
Well, first of all, we all have to stigmatize Fox News and right-wing media where we can, because it's not legitimate, and we can't pretend it's legitimate. And so when you can criticize corporate media and say, why don't you pay more attention to this? The role that right-wing media has had to play, in dividing our country, we have to be active and do stuff like that. But then as far as like individuals go, I think that one mistake a lot of people make is just automatically dismissing them and saying, well, they're stupid, or they're all horrible, or they're all racist. That may be true for some of them. I don't know how many, but there are many, just like my father, who are just gullible. And so if you have that attitude that they're just stupid and hateful, right, you're not going to get anywhere, and you're certainly not going to. They're not going to feel like you're understanding. You know what I mean? So, I think one approach is Socratic questioning. If you want to try and influence them, to not come across like you're attacking them or defensive yourself, but asking questions like, well, why do you like this man, this president? Why is he? What is it that you like? I mean, just the kind of questioning that gets them to think. The group in my film that I interview, called Hear Yourself Think, they have great ideas for actually helping to deprogram people, and some of it is this Socratic questioning kind of thing. It's remarkable. You can actually see like videos of how they can sometimes break through to people, and then there's of course trickery. You could try parental block, block Fox on your TV. Don't tell anybody I said that.
No, actually, if you look on the internet, that's a thing. There's like instructions for how to block your parents from watching Fox News. So
yeah, I tweet about that quite a bit, and some of my followers, whatever, they tweet about that too. So yeah, that has become kind of a thing. And then, like if they're older, like getting them out of the house more if possible. And, I think they're like addicted to this because it's excitement. So if they have something to replace that with, then they won't be so addicted to that, devious form of excitement. But it's hard. Then there's other tips like Stephen Hassan. He's written a book on cults, and he actually was in a cult when he was younger. He was a Mooney. I don't know if you remember them, but he got out of it, and so he became like a cult deprogramming expert, and he's got some books out that are helpful for his deprogramming. But yeah, I'd say the most important thing is not to dismiss them. I mean, unless they're pointing a gun at you or whatever, and they're just crazed, then there may not not be much that you can do. But sometimes you can reach them. Like, I don't know if you saw that woman on television who the journalist was telling her, she saw the Republican talking about why he believed in impeachment. And she said, gee, I never knew there was anything bad about Trump in the Mueller report. Because I watch mostly conservative media. And it's like, that is the root of the entire problem. They're not necessarily dumb or stupid. It's that this is what they're fed, fairy tales. So I think that's really helpful if you recognize that. It's not a be-all and end-all, but yeah, I think it really, some understanding, if possible, is a good point. Like with my dad too. I remember once when I was unemployed and I needed to get health insurance, and I was just, oh my God, going through hell, trying to discern like, well, what can I get that where I don't have like $100,000 limit, or no hospitalization or anything like that. And I was discussing that with him, like as a personal experience. And he almost came to the conclusion himself that, well, the government needs to do something about this. So that was surprising too, approaching it on a personal level.
This film came out before the 2016 election. In many ways, maybe if we had all watched it, we could have predicted some of what happened.
We were trying to get it out sooner.
Yeah. But if anything, things have gotten worse, not better, in terms of the media. What sorts of things have you been seeing and tracking and what's going on with right-wing media since the film came out?
Well, it's almost like, before they didn't want to appear like they were biased, so they pretended they weren't. Now they don't even pretend. I mean, it's just kind of like all-out war. It's like they've become emboldened. I mean, especially since they have like a president on their side. So, but I do think that more people are becoming aware. It's a little late, but more people are becoming aware that this is the root of the problem. This is why our country is divided. But, I mean, we can be hopeful that because we understand about some of the problems that happened that contributed to Trump getting elected, and on Facebook and trolls and all that we just keep educating people, and that we need media literacy in this country, and we have to push for that. It's almost like we can't rest, Yeah. I don't mean depressing. But, I mean, we have to rest, of course, knowing that, but, yeah. It's just that whatever your issue is, media has to be a big part of that, or you won't get anywhere, because like 40% of the country is being told lies and fabrications and fairy tales, So given that, democracy has been really wounded and hurt.
So how can people watch this film now that we've gotten them all interested in watching it? What are some of the places they can catch it?
It's really good. Well, they can go to the website, thebrainwashingofmydad.com, just to see all of the streaming places it's available. They can order DVDs if they want, or it's on iTunes, YouTube.
It's on Amazon Prime, because that's how I watched it.
Right. Okay, so here's the deal about Amazon Prime. I'm just going to be really honest. We get 7 cents when anybody watches it on Amazon Prime, and we're still paying back our backer. So if you can afford to pay $2.99 instead, that helps us out a little bit. Although if you can't afford it, just watch it on Amazon Prime. It's more important for people to watch it.
What's next for you? What are you working on now?
Well, I took a break from filmmaking, and actually, since this is still a very, very important subject to me, I'm actually writing a book, because I think that you tend to get taken more seriously if you have written a book. So I'm in discussion with certain publishers right now, and it's called The Brainwashing of America. So that's what I'm doing, and I think you could maybe look for it in 2020, hopefully before the next election. That's what I'm hoping for. No, but thank you for asking. Yeah.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for joining us. It was really, really great watch. I hope people will check it out. This stuff goes back further than I think a lot of people realize. And we haven't mentioned the Lewis Powell memo, which you talk about in the film. And we recently read Elizabeth Warren's book. She talks about the Lewis Powell memo. So I'll link to it in our show notes. It's one of the very most important things that has happened in this country in the past few decades to get us where we are today. And I think it's really important to look at this, figure out the roots of it, but then also figure out, how can we move people? And it sounds like, kind of has to happen on a one-on-one individual kind of basis to move people away from this. But it's really, really hurting our country.
Yeah, and actually that was one of the things that surprised me too, was the Lewis Powell memo. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, so Lewis Powell, I'll put a link and people should read more about it. But, this is a memo he wrote and then shortly thereafter became a Supreme Court justice. So,
Mm-hmm. Funny thing.
Funny thing that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thanks so much. And thanks for making this piece and sharing a little bit about your family and then taking that to a deeper examination of this. We'll put links up on our website so people can find the website for your film and can find some of the places that they can check it out.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.